new mission for the USS Constitution. Chapter 4.
Vice Admiral Susan Phyllis Stone ran out of her cabin, down the corridor, to another door, and she began banging on that door, sobbing out.
Dale.
Commander Dale Even Sims opened the door and was completely overwhelmed by the woman that threw herself into his arms, sobbing.
Dale, oh Dale, I'm sorry, I love you, and I say yes.
Dale put his arms around her and kissed her between sobs. As he stood there with this woman sobbing, kissing her, he asked,
"What happened?"
She took a deep breath.
I came to my senses. I love you, and I say yes to marriage. Yes.
Dale took her to the love seat and helped her sit as he himself sat. He held her, whispering comforting words. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small box and opened it, showing her the ring in it. He then took the ring and placed it on the third finger of her left hand. She smiled through her tears.
Oh Dale, no one has ever told me that they loved me.
Dale asked.
"What about your folks?"
I was an orphan. No one ever wanted to adopt me. Dale, do you really love me?
He replied.
"More than you'll ever know."
Tearing up, she asked.
Dale, may I stay here tonight?
He nodded.
"Yes."
She asked.
Will you make love to me?
Dale looked down into her eyes.
"Only if that is what you want."
She stammered.
That's what I want. Love me, please.
Inevitably morning came, and the lovers were sharing breakfast when they heard, "Now, hear this. This is the captain. Our mission begins in 1 hour, day shift on duty in 1/2 hour. That is all, Captain out." They smiled, cleaned up after the meal, and dressed for the duty day. Dale asked.
"Where will you be today?"
She answered.
Mostly on the bridge. I will check up on Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Stein.
She asked.
Where will you be?
He replied.
"My duty station is in the sensor lab. Or maybe the captain will want me someplace else now that I'm a full commander. I'll let you know."
They kissed and left for their duty stations. David and Admiral Stone were considering the abduction in prison. They concluded that the abductors did not care about keeping their prisoners alive, but considered that such suffering the prisoners might endure, so much the better. A small room for 3 people, no amenities, no food, a little water, and a little air exchange would cause the greatest suffering before eventual death. Obviously, the abductors were without compassion of any kind. David thought that when he finds these criminals, he would subject them to the very same suffering. Well, it was a nice thought, but the Navy would never allow it. Admiral Stone asked about Commander Sims' position now that he was a full commander. David told her, where he is the best place for him. He knows more about the ship's sensors than any other crew. He was division head, he will remain division head. David paused. How are you two getting on? She held up her hand.
He asked me to marry him, and I said yes.
David smiled. Congratulations. I'll pray for your happiness. Tall called.
Captain, Admiral York.
David replied. On screen,
the image of Admiral York appeared and said,
Our representatives.
David answered, progressing well, sir.
Come
They
see
should be back
Admiral.
at full strength by the time we arrive in Krill space. The Admiral responded.
Good. Well, you have lived to depart immediately. Calm seas and fair winds, Constitution. York out.
Admiral Stone and David replied.
Come
seize
seize Admiral.
David ordered. Hank, Krill space. Stella, UL-12. Please. Execute. Admiral Stone sat next to Stella and chatted with her. David asked, Hank, how long before we reach Krill space? Hank replied, about 6 days, sir. David thought, 6 days? Oh, well. The 6 days passed, slowly for some and too quickly for others, but it passed. Stella said.
Captain, Krill space in 30 minutes.
David ordered, all stop at 10 kilometers. She replied.
Aye, sir.
Admiral Stone looked at David.
Why short of Krill space, Captain?
He replied, I want to be cautious, I want to know about the Enterprise, and I want to scan this entire sector, just in case. We do not yet know who is responsible for your abduction. She nodded her head.
I understand. I'll go check on Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Stein.
David called Commander Sims. Dale, I need you to scan this whole sector. I want to know about anything that moves, the who, what, where, and potential status of friend or foe. Dale returned.
Aye, sir. How shall I get the information to you? All at once, the whole package, or each target separately?
David replied, You had better spoon-feed me. The whole package would be too much at one time, but compile a single package for Admiral Stone. Dale replied.
Aye, aye, sir.
David sat in the center chair as the ship waited for the negotiators from the Krill Empire to move toward the designated coordinates when Commander Sim's voice came over the comm.
Captain, I've detected a ship advancing toward us at sublight speed. The ship is running dark, but its configuration is that of a Defender-class ship.
The hair on the back of David's neck stood straight up, and he commanded, "Shields up, yellow alert, battle stations." Admiral Stone asked.
Captain, why battle stations?
David replied, "That ship is running dark, sublight toward us. Better safe than sorry. I believe that's the Enterprise. There's a stink about this whole situation as if we are puppets in the hands of a master manipulator, possibly Admiral York." Admiral Stone replied.
Admiral York would never do such a thing.
David replied, "Who then? Who has the authority to direct the Enterprise to sneak up on us? And with what ends in mind? The one person I trust more than anyone is Admiral Halloran." Computer burst transmission to Admiral Halloran. Defender-class ship, running dark, stealthily approaching. Stevens. David turned. Tall, hail that ship. Tall replied.
No response, sir.
David ordered, "Keep trying." Then Tall said.
Captain, a burst message for you.
David replied, "On screen." There on screen was this message: Admiral Halloran under arrest. Surrender to the Enterprise. York. David ordered. Tall, send this message to that ship. George, I will not surrender. Admirals Keeler, Stone, and Ambassador Stein are aboard, waiting for Krill Empire negotiators. Stand down. David Stevens. Frowning, David mused, I can't believe they would arrest a fleet admiral with 3 Navy Crosses and the Medal of Honor. Tall said.
Captain, we're being hailed.
David replied, on screen. There on screen was Captain George Perry, captain of the USS Enterprise.
David, we have orders to take you in tow, place you and everyone on your ship under arrest, and capture the Krill emissaries.
David responded, under whose orders and for what reason? A very tired-looking George Perry replied.
The orders come from Admiral York. Because you have gone rogue, and the Krill are our enemies.
David looked at Admiral Stone. York wouldn't do this? What do you think, now, Admiral? We are under attack by our friend, Admiral Halloran is under arrest, and this is all from York. David turned back to the screen. George, I will not surrender. You know that. Please stand down. I do not want to fight you, you're my mentor and friend. George replied.
The last thing I want to do is fight you. Suggest some compromise.
David regarded his former captain. George, I'll send you proof of our mission. Will that convince you? George replied.
Send it. I'll consider it.
David said, okay, stand by. Number 1, keep an eye on the Enterprise. David and Admiral Stone entered his ready room. They ordered the computer to compile everything from Admiral York, including burst transmissions, voice recordings, and actions from when the Constitution received its first transmission from Admiral Stone to that moment and transmitted the package to the Enterprise. David looked at the screen and asked, well? George replied.
We both stand down for 12 hours and then reconvene.
David nodded. Agreed. Then, David turned to Admiral Stone. I think we had better get together with Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Stein and our senior officers and form a plan to escape. That is if the Enterprise doesn't buy our evidence. We still have a viable mission, a treaty with the Krill. Admiral Stone only nodded assent. David ordered, Tall, ship-wide, please. Tall replied,
Ship-wide, sir.
Then David said, now hear this, this is the captain. Admiral Keeler, Ambassador Stein, and all senior officers will meet in the conference room at 1400 hours. All personnel will remain alert, condition yellow remains in effect. Captain out. Admiral Stone asked.
Shouldn't you leave your best officers on duty? Just in case?
David replied, we have nothing to fear until the 12 hours has expired. Captain Perry is a man of his word. At the meeting, David explained the situation to the group. We sent Captain Perry the record of everything that has happened aboard this ship since we received the first call from Admiral Stone up to just a few hours ago. The burst transmissions, the calls, the kidnappings and rescue of our guests,
Dale's promotion ceremony, Admiral York's orders, everything. We are waiting for Captain Perry to digest all that and decide his course of action. Now, we have to anticipate George's reaction. If he doesn't accept the truth, how do we escape without firing on our own people? The room was silent. Just outside, two ensigns were discussing their time at Annapolis.
We had 20 seconds left on the clock. We were tied, Army 6, Navy 6, and I called a Statue of Liberty play to the right. I hit the left end for a touchdown, Navy 1.
David looked up. That's brilliant, risky, but brilliant. O'Reilly, can we prepare a few dummy torpedoes? O'Reilly nodded.
Aye, Captain.
David went on. We could launch a barrage of dummy torpedoes centered to the port side of the Enterprise, and while they are reacting to that barrage, we escape to port, hitting UL-17 as quickly as possible. Admiral Keeler smiled.
That is brilliant, but the execution has to be perfect. Can you be that well coordinated, Captain?
David nodded. We had better be. O'Reilly, get on those dummy torpedoes. Enough to fill all our tubes. O'Reilly responded enthusiastically.
Aye, aye, sir.
At the 11th hour, David received a call from O'Reilly.
Captain, we have 20 torpedoes ready in all our tubes. I have added a small light show in each one to entertain the sailors. We are ready.
David replied, Great, we'll record the whole thing to watch when we have time. Thanks, Captain. David called, Number 1, I want a Krill battlecruiser to approach the Enterprise on the port side at 0 hour. Larry looked up.
What?
David answered, I know one of those bright young ensigns has played around with holographic images. Let's see if he can distract the Enterprise. Larry responded.
Aye, aye, sir. Do you know who it is?
David smiled, no, but someone does. Larry told Tall he wanted ship-wide, then said,
Now hear this. This is the first officer. Our captain wants to distract the Enterprise with a holograph outside the ship. Will the ensign that has done this report to the bridge as soon as possible?
It took 3 minutes for the ensign to enter the bridge and report.
Ensign Waters reporting, sir.
Larry stuck his head in the ready room.
Captain, and Ensign Waters has reported. I assume about the hologram.
David replied, Thanks, Larry. Send him in. Ensign Steve Waters stepped into the ready room and reported.
Ensign Waters reporting, sir, ma'am.
David said, rather gently, Ensign, female officers are referred to as sir also, a tradition of the Navy. Steve nodded. Next, Admiral Stone asked.
Ensign, can you design and project a hologram of a Krill battlecruiser aft into the port side of the Enterprise?
Steve answered.
Yes, sir.
Next, David asked, how long would it take to generate that hologram? Steve replied,
Give me a picture of a Krill battlecruiser, and I'll have it ready in 10 minutes.
Next, David ordered, computer produce a picture of a Krill battlecruiser and make it available to Ensign Waters. The computer replied,
The picture is now available to Ensign Waters.
David said, Thank you, Ensign. Do what you have to do and stand by. Steve replied,
Aye, sir.
And he ran out of the ready room to the lift. At the end of the 12-hour respite, Tal announced that Captain Perry was hailing.
David commanded, on screen. He continued, George, what now? Captain Perry replied,
The evidence you provided is compelling. However, it is inconclusive. I cannot believe that Admiral York would do the things you accuse him of. Therefore, David, please surrender. You know that I would never allow any harm to you or your crew.
David replied, George, you know that I will never surrender. This will probably mean the end of one of us. The battle is on. Number 1, contact the Krill and fire torpedoes. Steve was standing by with his finger on the button when he heard his captain give the order. The hologram appeared just as he had been instructed. The torpedoes headed toward the Enterprise. As expected, the Enterprise reacted by moving toward the starboard, and David ordered, execute escape route. And the Constitution accelerated out of the sector at UL-17. The Enterprise stopped, then Captain Perry realized just what had happened and began to laugh, a very hearty explosive laugh, he said, trying to speak through his laughter.
Number 1, that was brilliant. Well, we'll never catch them now. But now I'm sure that he is not a rogue, nor is his ship. And now, we have to consider Admiral York.
The USS Constitution flew away at UL-17 for an hour, then David ordered, UL-12, Hank, plot a course to Proxima 3, Execute. Admiral Keeler said.
Captain, that was amazing. Now what?
David replied, the first thing is we are still alive. We are still free. And we can begin to plan. Then, Admiral Stone asked.
Captain, may I speak to you privately?
David replied, of course. In my ready room, after this meeting. Number 1, I want Captain O'Reilly, Commander Sims, and Ensign Waters up here. And, oh, there's an ensign that called a Statue of Liberty play that won the game against Army. I want him up here, too. Everyone gathered around the command chair, and David spoke. O'Reilly, that torpedo display was wonderful, thank you. Waters, your Krill battle cruiser was spectacular, I want you to hone your art, we may need it again. And you, Ensign, I heard your story about the Statue of Liberty play, which gave me the idea for the play we just pulled off. Thank you all.
Yes!
Dismissed. Dale in my ready room. Admiral Stone and Commander Sims looked at David. David asked, well? Dale replied.
Captain, will you marry us?
David regarded the couple, of course. Say 1600 in the rec room? Susan and Dale nodded.
Yes!
Yes.
David said, I will have to register this with the Navy. Admiral, how will you be known? She replied, hanging on Dale's arm.
I will take Dale's name. I will be Susan Sims.
David asked, do you want to invite the crew? They both nodded, yes. David ordered, Call, ship wide please. Hall replied,
Ship wide, sir.
David nodded at the pair.
Now hear this. This is Admiral Stone.
And Commander Sims.
Everyone is invited to our wedding.
In the rec room at 1600 hours.
Stone.
And Sims out.
David smiled, thank you kids. As long as love is alive, we have a chance. You two go and get ready. See you in the rec room at 1600. Stella took Susan in hand, and they began selecting a gown for the wedding. At 1600, everyone gathered in the rec room. Dale wore his dress blues and waited next to the captain. When Susan appeared, everyone admired her. Dale was son. Susan advanced, wearing a stunning white gown that set off her feminine charms to the maximum advantage. Dale turned to David.
She's beautiful. I never dreamed that I'd ever marry a woman this gorgeous. Captain, I feel a little faint.
David chuckled, you'll be all right, Commander. After the ceremony, David and Admiral Keeler watched the newly joined couple dance and then run, hand in hand, down the corridor to their cabin. Admiral Keeler remarked wistfully,
They deserve a little happiness.
David smiled. Admiral, we all deserve a little happiness. If you'll excuse me, sir. David grabbed Stella's hand and gently pulled her toward their cabin, which she was glad to follow. The following morning, David and Larry talked.
Captain, what now?
David answered, I think we need to rescue Admiral Halloran first. We need his rank, his Medal of Honor, his connections, and his wisdom. Admiral Keeler had walked up as they spoke.
You're right, David. The question is how.
Larry replied,
First, we need to find out where he is. Then we can devise a plan.
Stella looked up from the helm.
I don't see Susan, Admiral Sims.
David laughed. No one saw us for 3 days after our wedding. Stella blushed.
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
Admiral Keeler said,
I hope they're happy. I wish I could see my wife. I believe the ambassador would like to see his wife too.
David smiled. We need an escort back to Sector 00. David tapped his comm badge. Ensign Waters, report to the bridge. When the ensign arrived on the bridge, David asked him, Ensign, you know the holographs in the holo chamber can be touched, sensed, and felt. Can you project such a holograph in space? He responded,
Sir, I don't know. I've never tried. Why?
David answered, I want to return to Sector 00 with an escort. Say, the USS Enterprise, the USS Defiant, and the USS John Paul Jones. But the holographs must be perfect and fool even the ground defense system. The ensign asked,
How long do I have to work it out?
David replied, You tell me. We must rescue Admiral Halloran and the wives of Admiral Keeler and Ambassador Stein. But we would be sitting ducks without the escort. The ensign replied,
I will start on it right now, but, sir, I have a couple of friends that could be a huge help.
David said, Number 1, see that Ensign Waters gets the lab space and his friends to perfect his holographic skills and give us the escort we need. Larry smiled an evil grin.
Aye, aye, sir.
Larry and the ensign went into a huddle to determine the system requirements. Then walking to the lift, they left the bridge to begin the work needed for the captain's escort.